So in the last tutorial, we looked at setting backgrounds and environments up with using tile sets. So we're not restricted to just a square block that the artist gave us. We can set pieces of a background together in different combinations and build up our worlds uniquely. So the next thing to look at is probably animations on our characters. But in order to do that, we'll need a character to animate. So last time we set up this background and a platform for a character to jump on. We used tile sets and then set an edge collider here along the floor and the walls to kind of keep our character restricted there. And that's just some extra that it's not going to affect anything because our character is going to be over here for this simple example. But just an edge collider, tracing out the parts of the background we want to restrict our character to being inside of. And on the platform, we just drew it with tile sets and set a box collider around it. And our background stuff was set at a Z of positive 10, which is away from us, with the main camera set with a Z of negative 10, which is towards us. And so we could stick the platforms and characters and everything in between those two. So this platform is at 0, which is nicely in the middle between the camera and the background. So we'll always do that. So we need some players to put in here, and this tutorial series is about both, so I'll go ahead and include that as well. So I'm going to come over here to the asset store, go to my assets, and here in my assets, I already have a couple things selected to work with. I found this Ninja sprite sheet, just a sprite sheet for a character. So we just need a sprite sheet, which is the traditional animation, lots of images that we will put together on a timeline to work with. Another type of animation is where we have a picture and then give it like a skeletal structure and drag it around. For starting out here though, sprite sheets are a little easier to work with, so we'll go ahead and import this sprite sheet as well as Bolt, and that should be straightforward. I'll go ahead and set up Bolt. There's no need to watch that in the video, and I will be back after those are brought in. Okay, so now that I have a character asset and Bolt brought in and installed in the project, I'm going to set up the layout. So typically for working with Bolt, this was covered in another tutorial. We'll want a graph window, somewhere that we can access it, and the variables window. We'll need both of those to work with Bolt. So I'll go ahead and set it up like this. And this is covered in much more detail in another tutorial in the playlist. I almost skipped recording this and was like, well, I might as well do it fast, go over it quickly as well, just review, reiterate the points to help make sure they all make sense. So we need the graph to put together our Bolt macro and the variables for the values we're going to use in that macro. And we, along with Bolt, installed this Ninja character asset. So I'm just going to go in here, and first off, I'm just going to pick a random picture of him just standing there to kind of start off with. Why did that not bring it in? What is that? That is no sword idle to bring that in. For some reason it's not dropping there. If I drop it over here. That worked. Okay. I'm not sure why it wasn't dropping on the screen. Perhaps it had something to do with the tile set was still being active, but I just drag it over to the hierarchy. It would kind of work the same. We can drag in there, see we have a character now, and we're ready to put a control script together with Bolt to get that character moving. And let's see, what else do we need? Oh, the character needs the laws of physics to apply to it. That way gravity pulls down and he stands on the floor. And we already set up the We already set up the floor and the platform to handle the collision, so we need that stuff on the player as well. So with our player selected, I'm going to rename it Ninja. Give it a more useful name. Then we need to add a component under Physics 2D. We'll want a rigid body 2D. And that way the laws of physics apply. All the defaults are probably okay in this case. And we also need a collider. Physics 2D. We'll just set a box collider, which is a little big. So I'll click on that and bring it into right about the size. Whoops. To bring it in to make it right about the same size as the character. Grab these little handles. Set the box up right at the edge of the character. So now the laws of physics apply. The character has a collider. The floor and platform have colliders. So gravity should take hold, drop him to the floor, and we'll see him stop falling if we give the game a test run. Well, we can see once the game started, the character was up here, and he just kind of fell down to the floor. But the camera didn't really follow him. So we might want a camera follow set up as well. And to do that, just like Bolt and the assets, it was covered in another tutorial in much more detail. But I'm just going to bring in a Cinemachine camera. So to do that, we can go to Window and Package Manager. Select all packages. Then we can just go through the things available in Unity and select Cinemachine to get a quick, easy camera follow and hit Install. And I'm going to pause the video while that installs. And when that finishes installing, close this window and there's a new option in the main menu for Cinemachine. We can create a 2D virtual camera, which automatically links to our main camera. This was covered in another tutorial, so I'm just going to set it up really quick here. The camera is going to follow the Ninja. We'll set a little bit of a look ahead time. Turn on some smoothing. Set some dead zone in the middle so the character can move around before the camera starts following it. And that should give us a good camera angle to watch. So let's run this and see if that worked. So you can see this time the camera followed the character down when it started running, but we don't need to see the grid lines. So that'll work for just the quick example, and we're ready to make the character move with a Bolt macro. So I'll stop this, and we can set up a new folder in our assets to hold our macros. Create a folder, call it macros. Go in here and create a new Bolt flow macro and define how the game flows from state to state. So these are things we've seen before, covered in much more detail in another tutorial, but I'll just call it Ninja Control, if I can spell correctly, and link it to the Ninja character by adding a component for a flow machine. And dragging this macro into the spot. So I'm going to set up the macro real quick. This video is starting to run long, and this is all setup stuff that's covered in other tutorials. So I'm going to set it up and we'll just talk about it quickly here in a moment. So I'll pause the video while it does that. And there's another video that covers it in much more detail. Okay, so between scenes there, I went ahead and set up the movements. So first thing I forgot on the rigid body to freeze the rotation so the character doesn't spin around trying to walk up and down these angles. Doesn't fall flat on his face. And then movement can be a little bit easier to set up if we use the axes, input axes that we have. And as a reminder, to see what those are, if you go to Project Settings, under Input, I may have to expand this, but you'll see different axes here. So we have a horizontal axis input, which we get from either the left or right keys, or the A and D keys, as well as a jump axis, which we activate from the spacebar. And we can use those, which return a value between -1 and 1, depending on whether or not the key is being pressed, and a 0 if it's not being pressed. And then over in the bolt script, I use those input axes, the horizontal and the jump, which multiplies by some speed variables to change the transform translate position of this. And the variables for the speed, I just stuck to the object, gave them object scope so they're connected right to the Ninja, and I just picked a 0.3 and 0.7 to start with. But that gets us some quick movement with the character. It may not be perfect here, but we can give it a test run now. So using those input axes, the horizontal and the jump, seem good for a platform type of game. Use those along with some variables to keep track of better sense of speed, and use that to adjust the transform of our character. So let's give that a test run. Okay, and as well as jump. And you can kind of spam the jump key, but it seems to get some basic movement down. So that'll work for the purposes of this. So now we're ready for some animations though. It'd be nice if the character had an idle animation. When he was standing still, you could tell he was standing still. And then when he was moving, have an animation that appears like walking. So we'll do those in the next video. All this was covered in other tutorials. I just thought I'd include it again. And remember, one of the advantages of bolt scripts here is when it's running, we can see the values as they move through, which makes debugging a whole lot easier sometimes. You can see those values change. So be back in the next video for a quick pass at animating our character here.